Welcome to another edition of the eSpot with Camille. The eSpot is your location for the latest in entertainment, beauty, and design from the people who make it. Thanks for joining. All right, welcome everyone to a special edition for Fatherhood Conference in North Carolina here. I have two amazing guests that are speakers at this year's event, and it coincides with Juneteenth this year. So there's a lot of that's going to be going on this weekend, and I can't wait for you to hear from these speakers. They will be speaking next week at the McKinnon Center. Go Wolfpack. All of these references will make sense soon because I have the one and only Dwayne Ballin, who is a well-known staple in this area as being the sportscaster for not only for basketball, football, but he also worked for the Golf Channel. And joining him is Christopher Emanuel, who is doing all these wonderful things in the community. I cannot wait for you to meet both of these speakers and what they plan to bring to this year's North Carolina Fatherhood Conference.
Hi, Camille. Happy to be here.
Great. Thank you so much for joining me today. I feel very March Madness right now, even though it's very much June. And thank you so much for joining me. I was like reading through your resume and I was just like, I know all this stuff. I went to college here in the area. So you were a staple on my TV. And I do know that allegedly you might be more of a UNC fan. So I had to bring
I am absolutely neutral.
Oh, great. You're like, I'm Sweden.
Yeah, I am Sweden. I am married to UNC, my wife, but I'm neutral. I'll be Sweden the whole time.
Okay. Well, just to break the ice, Christopher, how about you? Who do you root for?
I'm a Carolina man. I got to go with the Gamecocks for sure.
South Carolina.
Absolutely. Okay. Yes.
Oh, so you're switching it up on us, huh?
It's only right. I got to rep for the hometown. But it's safe to say we're both the Carolinas, so we're going to do it together today.
All right. Well, I want to start off with, being a father means so many different things to so many different people. So I'd love to hear from you. What were your big reasons for getting involved with the North Carolina Fatherhood Conference, and what you hope people will gain from your experience in fatherhood? I'll start with you, Christopher, because I feel like I've been kind of zeroing in on the celebrity, at least for those of us who are big sports fans here in the area. So Christopher, share your expertise and what you plan to bring.
Absolutely. First off, Camille, thank you for this phenomenal platform. I think media is so essential in being able to really paint that narrative and control that narrative. But for me, I got to keep it honest. You know, our Heavenly Father is the greatest example of what a father should be, in my opinion. And I was reared by a well of phenomenal men and kings, and my grandfather was very instrumental. So automatically, just by default, I wanted to be a great father, but no one ever told me what I would have to go through to be that dad. And with that being said, my daughter was involved in human trafficking through adoption. So I fought for her and got full custody of her. So through these lessons, just want to ensure that dads who experience those obstacles and structural impediments actually have the recipe, because it's hard to fight when you've never experienced. Like, I didn't have anybody that could teach me and guide me. So being in this space and operating in the 1%, we want to ensure that other fathers and families are equipped so that they can put themselves in the best position. So I'm just excited to be able to connect with all the dads in North Carolina.
Wow. You kind of threw me a curveball there. I did not know that your own child was part of the trafficking, because I realized there was mention of that you're very much involved in these different nonprofit organizations for that. But so we're going to have to come back and talk more about that, because human trafficking is such a huge issue, especially in this area, because it's one of the third, I think, largest places where kids are trafficked, or women and kids are trafficked from, because of being so close to major highways and airports for that matter too. So we'll definitely have to talk more about that. And then for you, Dwayne, what was your reason for getting involved with this conference, and what do you hope to bring as well?
Well, Camille and Christopher, your story is just touching already, and I tell you, it's so important that you've taken the path you've taken. A simple thing is, I knew about the Family Research Council through my brother, who is on the committee, on the board. He is in administration with the Raleigh, North Carolina Police Department. So I was aware of it by then. And when Derek Bird, the executive director, reached out to me and inquired about whether or not I'd be available, I said, I thought about it, I looked at my calendar, I said, sure. And for me, fatherhood it's outside of what I do in my life with my life partner. I don't know that there's a more important thing I'll ever do in this world than the stewardship I've had with my two sons, and one of whom has autism, which has really been different. As I'm sure Christopher didn't start out on this journey thinking that I'm going to have a child who's going to be a victim of trafficking, just like I didn't start out thinking that, well, my son is going to have autism. So for me, the thing about fatherhood is the flexibility of mind to understand that, there's nothing set. There's no set playbook. You have to take your children as they are and guide them. And you have to be ready to access their world, whatever that is. The trauma that Christopher's child experienced, the special needs that my son has, all those things shape you and make you realize, well, it may not be this linear path that you thought it was going to be. I'm always honest about it. It was very difficult for me in the beginning to accept the fact that I had a son with autism. It was very hard. Took me a while to accept it. But once I did that, I went through the process. I allowed my world to open up, and it made it so much easier for me to be a father to him. So what I'm hopeful of, I'll convey when I visit with all the fathers is that, look, there's, as long as you care, you can figure it out, but you got to be open.
You bring up a great point, because I think with you being someone who works in the sports world, which is a very masculine dominated area and very much a competitive area, and just even being in sports media, like that's the most coveted job I think that most people have that join, because they're like, oh, you get to play and watch games all day of some of the greatest heroes. I wonder if that played any part to you feeling like, what can I do to fix this? Because I listened to some of your previous interviews, and you had mentioned, like, you were like, no, we're gonna change this. We're gonna fix this type of thing. And we're learning. I mean, granted, you were going through this through the 90s before there was a lot of help out there, which I want to find out more what programs helped you the most with all of this. But I think also with fathers in general, they're the protectors, there's the providers. They're not really given that room to be fathers in a way where they can be nurturing, where they can be understanding. They have to like lay the law or play the bad cop, so to speak, in the scenario. So can you share a little bit more about how you came around and was able to really be vulnerable in this and let people know that, you guys had some challenges with your son that you had to overcome, but it was worth it?
Sure, we did. And it's and as you noted, my professional life has been within the environment of the supreme alpha male, sports. That's it. And for me, when my son Julian was first diagnosed, when he was age 3, the first hurdle I had to get over, and I know there are fathers out there that deal with this whether they want to admit it or not. I've been very honest about it, is I wondered what having a child with autism, in particular son with autism, said about me as a man. I thought, the way I internalized it, it was, well, what does that say about me? What are people going to look at with that? My son has autism. So, and obviously that was really wrong thinking. That was completely off. And I had to process through that first. And my wife, was amazing, because she jumped right in the world of autism. I tell you, the women do a lot of the heavy lifting. There are issues with divorce rates. A lot of men leave. It's just hard for men to deal with it, because, as you know, Camille, we want to fix things. And I was determined that I was going to straighten this out. This was not going to be. He was that age. He was tantruming. He was not very vocal. And it was very difficult to communicate with him. And I just was going to straighten it out. The way I was raised in Conway, South Carolina, all those years ago. We're going to straighten this out right now. This behavior is unacceptable. And so, with my wife's very steady hand guiding me, and I went through the process of beginning to realize, you know what? It is not about me. It is about this child whom I have stewardship over, and I've got to help them function in this world. And so once I got to that point, and it took a while, again, I always want to stress that. Once I got to that point, my world kind of opened up with him. And I was able to see and do things and understand things. And I learned that, well, this journey with him is going to be a lot different than I anticipated. But you know what?
Goodness.
If I'm ready, I think it'll be fine. And we were able to avail ourselves of so many resources. We live in North Carolina. We live in the Triangle, and the University of North Carolina, Duke University, do great research work in the field of autism. And we've got the North Carolina Autism Society, which is one of the best in the country. So we dove in. My wife became chairman of the board of that, the North Carolina Autism Society, and we availed ourselves of all the resources at the Autism Research Center at the University of North Carolina, which is UNC is the number one public institution in the world in autism research. So we were fortunate to be here, and we started a Fathers Conference at UNC with the Autism Research Center. I've worked with Duke and the fine work they've done. So, we've been able to avail ourselves of it. And basically, and I'm sure Christopher gets this, you kind of open yourself up to your child, and you kind of take cues from them, like, okay, where are we going to go with this? How can I help you move forward in life?
Yeah. I'm almost scared to even touch this topic because it just seems like such a raw area. But Christopher, share about your process with your daughter, because I mean, how did that even unravel? Like, she was in adoption, and that's how she was like, explain all of that, please, because this is a new term for me and new area at the same time. And at the same time, like, trying not to cry, thinking it, because I saw your Instagram and your daughter's so young, so it's just heartbreaking.
Right. First off, Dwayne, so much power and so much strength in you being vulnerable and allowing yourself to feel what you need to feel to continue to walk in your proper person, man. You're valued, and I really look forward to working with you. But to your question, Camille, I was involved throughout the entire process with the mother of my child, who I was elated. I mean, super excited. I couldn't wait to be a dad. Like, I mean, it was a dream come true, right? And being in that space where the family didn't approve of our relationship. Long story short, our daughter was trafficked through adoption trafficking. And in the midst of the pregnancy, when she got distant, however, we still talked. I just started talking to my family, being very vulnerable and discussing what I was experiencing. And Jill Thomason, my sister's best friend, came up with the South Carolina Responsible Father Registry. And what that does for any father who feels they have fathered a child or about to father a child, it requires a putative father, possible father, be notified in the event the baby is put up for adoption or if a father's rights are being terminated. So my intent was to ensure that I can be involved and engaged in my child's life like I want it to be. So I registered. I didn't tell her. And with the support of my family, I found out through an improper notice of adoption proceedings that my daughter was born in a different county, a different venue. So typically when a child is born or someone is looking to adopt a child or a child is placed for adoption, an ad goes in the newspaper and saying, hey, come claim this child if you feel this is your child. So I lived 2 hours away from the venue where it was improperly filed. So how am I going to even first know, and how am I going to be able to stop it, right? If I didn't register on the Responsible Father Registry, I wouldn't have been able to be legally obligated and or intervene in the unethical adoption practice. Moreover, when I received the improper notice, I was served on the 9th day, Camille and Dwayne, the 9th day out of 10 days. But the notice said I had 30 days to contest. So if I didn't drive 2 hours from Aiken, South Carolina to Greenville, South Carolina, right, the venue that was improper, I wouldn't be here today. So being in that space, not knowing if I would ever see my child again, not knowing if she was safe, not knowing what she looks like, and not knowing who I could talk to, I really leaned on God. And honestly, that's all I had. And in my mind, there wasn't anybody or anything that was going to stop me from being a responsible, involved, and an engaged dad. And I just documented honestly, and I was able to keep, the records and text messages and receipts, and I was able to prove to the court of the secretive nature of the adoption, and the courts didn't approve of the racism exhibited by, the family. And I should probably say this. There's a law in the state of South Carolina that labels biracial children as handicapped. So a child can't leave the state unless they have some type of mental, physical, or emotional disability. In my daughter's case, it was her mixed race that allowed her to be trafficked from South Carolina to California. So with that, I was able to prove that I could financially take care of my child. I had to prove that I was healthy because I had an aneurysm in 2011, and prove again the racism exhibited by the court. So I got temporary custody May the 3rd, and then I had to wait 6 months to terminate the biological mother's rights. In January of 2015 is when I removed the mother's name from the birth certificate, and I was awarded sole custody. So being in this space is easy for dads, obviously, not only to be outmaneuvered, but when there's an obscure law that you don't even know about, how are you going to even fight? So it's important that for me, going from the dad that fought to get my child to the dad that helps other fathers and organizations understand why it's important to engage families. And this is a topic that, not saying people don't know about, but people aren't necessarily paying attention. So if a child is in South Carolina, a dad has to register, right, under the law. I'm not practicing law nor giving legal advice. I want to be clear when I say that, right? But what if the mother was to move to North Carolina, where there isn't a responsible father registry? So that's where we're at right now.
I'm still held back by the idea that being biracial is considered a handicap. But even how long was it from the process that she was in California that she was in your arms and legally you were sole responsible? Because you said May 3rd, but how long before you actually had her?
Yeah, that's a good question. So my daughter was born February 11th, 2014. I got her back May the 3rd, 2014.
Okay. So it was pretty quick.
Pretty quick. Yeah, definitely. So she was a newborn. Thank God. Right.
Yeah. But, so she didn't have any attachment issues that you had to fight against, like losing Isaiah. I think of that movie as well.
Yeah,
while you're saying
exactly.
this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then it was really support and having the knowledge and just being responsible, right? And documentation is so essential, right? And we'll talk more about that at the conference. But I got her back January 2015. So 99% of dads in my situation in South Carolina.
Wait, May 3rd is when they made it legal, but you didn't get her back to the next following January?
So I got her back May the 3rd. I had physical custody of my daughter, right?
Okay.
But I had to wait 6 months to terminate because the biological mother or those who were interested in adopting could have fought me for my child. Wow. Right? So the process wasn't over until January 2015. And from that, I've been learning. I'm still learning so much. Right? I didn't know what I didn't know. It's a different language because it's by definitions when you read certain terms. So I'm like, well, what really happened, right? My daughter was stolen. My daughter should have never left the state of South Carolina. So with that, how many other dads are experiencing this that don't necessarily know, that are involved or engaged, or don't even know that they're even a dad, right? So it's one of the things that, we got to build awareness to. And we've been working with legislation, drafting new law, but most importantly, fighting for a national responsible father registry where each state has a connecting database to prevent adoption trafficking, but also to support fathers and protect adoption, because adoption isn't bad. It's just for children without a family, right? Don't come steal somebody's child. So much money is spent on taking families and separating families. What are we doing to keep families together? And that's where I feel responsible fatherhood comes into play at. And while you all are here and creating this narrative and using media so that we can take control of our communities, because there's something special, particularly in dads, especially Black dads.
No, it's something you keep hearing about, where fathers getting more involved, feeling free to be able to wear multiple hats, not to just stick with the roles that normally fathers are put in. And I think Dwayne touched on this as well, as far as like going from the fixer to being vulnerable with that.
Yeah.
What is some of the advice you would give to maybe a new father, or not necessarily a new father, but a father who's newly found out his or her daughter has autism? What were some of the things that helped you through that? Like, I know you were mentioning the different organizations that worked with you, but how did you find them? Where did you reach out? Because my audience, although a lot in North Carolina, there's some all over the state. So I'm curious what would help them find people that they can also lean on or learn from.
Sure. Well, there are organizations throughout the country, North America too, that there's an Autism Society in almost every state. There's Autism Speaks. And if you are near a university town area, chances are that someone at that university is involved in some form of autism scholarship research. Avail yourself of that. There are community organizations on the granular level that are everywhere, that are groups that are, because there are so many families. But when my son Julian was diagnosed, the rate was 1 in 10,000, and now it's under 1 in 60. So chances are almost everyone within the sound of our voice and looking at our faces knows someone affected with autism. Therefore, there are resources. You'll be surprised where they are. You've got to get out of your comfort zone, which is another thing I had to do. And again, you've got to understand that it is not going to be the way you thought it was going to be. You know, my son is going to be different, and we're going to work with that. Sure. I have a neurotypical son also, who is a couple of years younger than Julian, the one with autism. So you have to avail yourselves of those. You have to figure out, okay, what can I do? Because one thing about autism is that there is a high tendency of a lot of people with autism. They have areas that they laser in on and put intense attention on, and it's things they're into. For my son, the things are, he loves Disney animated movies, he loves animals, likes to talk about travel, and he's a very good artist. He can draw, and he draws animals and Disney characters. But that's basically the centerpiece of his world. So what I've had to do is figure out, we've got to use that to help move him along and help him develop. And people with autism, I know one young man who is in the trains. I know a young lady who all she ever wants to talk about is playing checkers and how you play checkers. And it's just the nature of the way their brains are wired. They're wired to really focus on one or two things intensely all the time. It's just the way it is. So then you figure out whatever that is, and you use that to help them be more full as human beings and live as full a life as they can. And I think also it's important, you cannot, and I learned this, you cannot use your blueprint of your life for them. You can't, because they're not you. Their experience is going to be different. And I can't imagine what Christopher's daughter's life would be like if he hadn't fought for her. He's already taken stewardship, and I'm sure he knows he's got to be aware as she develops. There are things that he personally will never really completely understand, but you've got to watch for it, and you've got to help them use that to develop themselves and live the best life they can live.
No, I think you bring up great points in that, because that's something every parent should learn, that there are children, but their lives will be different than ours, no matter if they're neurotypical or neurodiversity, because they're growing up in different times. They have social media. Like that alone just shifted the game in so much. But even more, I love that you were saying that, because there's so many times I look at my daughter, and I had much like yourself, where you were saying in the previous interview that I watched about you, where you had his whole life planned. He was going to be a Rhodes Scholar, all of these things. Yeah, and with my daughter, I had the same kind of visual of like everything that I wasn't able to do. I wanted to make sure she had those opportunities too. And I grew up in a military family, so I grew up all around the world, and I wanted her to know what it was like to have friends since kindergarten or whatever, and so on. And you realize when you live in Wake County, that's not always your choice when they keep redistricting or something. So you just never, as much as you may plan for certain things, you just never know how they can be diverted. And being a parent means being flexible and loving your child as whoever they may choose to be,
Yeah.
or who they choose to love, or however it may go. But since your son is like a full-on adult now,
Yes.
what are some of the things that I feel like maybe have been a tough hurdle? Because a lot of people have those issues at teenage years, or
Mm-hmm.
the terrible twos, or what were some things that, since you have both, that you noticed were a little bit more difficult, that maybe people out there with autistic children should pay more attention to, or even learn how to, I guess, navigate those areas or negotiate with terrorists, so to speak? Because that was one of my lines, like, I don't negotiate with terrorists, I'm the law. But then sometimes I'm like, okay, fine, you win. So what were some of those times when you just had to let the reins go in that sense too?
Well, it was, as I said, once I understood, once I began to come to terms with my son and who he was and what he was dealing with, it's then you realize, okay, things are going to happen, and they are going to happen, and you've got to recognize that. As my wife always said to me, he is not doing any of this on purpose. He doesn't wake up in the morning looking to hurt you or embarrass you. That's not
Defy you,
what's
yeah.
happening. So you realize that, because with Julian is in his 20s now. He's a young adult, but Julian socially is 9 years old. That's just a fact of our life. We don't know that that's the ceiling, but that's been plateaued for a while. Academically, he's more like a 12-year-old or so. But socially, really, he is. He talks about Christmas and Santa Claus all the time. We have to make special arrangements during the holidays for him to have a private visit with Santa, and he he's very childlike. And I'm not the first parent of a person with autism who deals with that. And but so you just understand, and you recognize there are things like, one of the things that's interesting is that Julian and I hold hands a lot, because that makes him comfortable. He will grab my hand wherever we are, and I am so fine with it. And that became an issue when he was an adolescent, simply because of the looks that people will give you, and they will. A lady once at a market, we were doing some shopping, and Julian just walked up to me. He put his head on my shoulder, and he's almost as tall as I am. I'm 6'1". He's almost as tall as I am, and he put his head on my shoulder and just took my hand. And I'm going about searching for items on the shelves, and this lady, I realized my peripheral vision. This lady is just looking at me and tisking. And I looked at her. I said, "How are you doing, ma'am? How was your day?" She said, "Boy, that size doesn't need to be holding his daddy's hand." And
wow.
So you hear stuff like that, and you go, "Well, ma'am, we are fine." And Julian, what he does is he's so engaging and friendly. He says, "Hi, how are you?" And he said, "I'm Julian." And he walked over, and within 3 minutes, she was eating out of his proverbial hands. So,
so he's a charmer too.
Yeah, he's a charmer. So, there are things that you have to deal with, and you have to understand, like Julian, as much as my wife and I would like for it to happen, we have to face the reality that Julian probably will never have a real relationship in his life with a partner. It's just probably not going to happen. And again, he's in his 20s. Anything's possible, but we have to prepare, and we have to make sure he's okay with the way his world is crystallizing around him. And so we try to stay dialed in with him. And so those things like that you have to deal with. And, it's just, it's one day at a time, and you make sure, as my wife says, is he smiling today? And we're good.
Yeah. That's great. Good. So Christopher, with being a dad of a little girl and being the sole provider, what has been some of the, I guess, challenges you've had to face? Because I have a biracial child, and I'm in one of those Facebook groups, and the most common thing I see is hair, help with hair. So what were some of the challenges for you beyond hair? Because I see your hair challenge yourself. So I'm curious, what were some of the other challenges that, she's still young, but still that you're kind of going through, that maybe you're getting those looks and tisk. So people out there also realize that it's not their place to say anything, because they don't know the challenges that people are going through.
Yeah. And I love how you said challenge, and not hardship. The challenge is something that we can overcome, right? I'm so big on language. But I love challenge. I love adversity. It reveals what I'm capable of. That's just been my life. So being in that space, as you said, raising a biracial child, a few things come to mind, because it's on the internet, it's on the Atlantic, it's everywhere, right? So I have to keep in mind that It went from brick and mortar to click and order. We live in a digital world, right? So
Mhm.
everything is on the internet. So
The
creating a
metaverse is
safe,
real.
it is real, right?
Yeah.
But being in that space now, and it can be at school, and somebody may seen the story and may say, well, where's your mom or something like that, right? And knowing the circumstance. So being able to talk to her according to her age so that she can I got to make sure she's not in here listening, but talking to her according to her age so she can understand how to communicate effectively, and knowing that the questions are more important than the answers, but it's all about delivery. It's not what you say, it's how you say it, and getting her to understand that she has love and she has, family support. The second thing is I'm a single dad, right? So I remember going and having her, and I would have to, take her into the, the male's restroom, or I would be in the store and people would look like, hey, is that your baby? Is that your daughter? What? What do you mean? Why wouldn't this be my child? You know what I mean? It's just
I mean, they're
questioning.
thinking also like the trafficking way too, right? Because you see these posters in the bathroom, or at least in the
Mm,
women's bathroom, where
mm,
if these are the signs for trafficking, if you see this, call blah 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 blah,
yeah.
and so on. So because my husband, he goes through that sometimes, and sometimes I'm like, they're doing it for public safety, but it helps if they looked more alike in
Yeah.
some aspects. So it's a hard area to try to be mad at someone, but at the
Mm,
same time being like, why would you even question me? But you're like, oh, because you see the news, you see the numbers.
absolutely. Yeah. And it was just, you don't know what you don't know. There's no manuscript to being a dad. It's just something, right, that
Mhm.
you learn to you learn about yourself, and like Dwayne was saying, you focus on that child and you build around that child, and according to, and on the, every circumstance is different, but for me it's just continuing to create that safe place to be able to communicate with my daughter so that she can truly understand her journey, you know
Yeah,
with the stigmas and the narratives behind the story. That's my biggest challenge. Yeah.
now we talked about challenges. So now I want to talk about the good parts of being a
Yeah.
dad. What has been some of those hero moments for you where you're like, oh, I got this. Like I'm doing so good. Or I mean, I know they might be fleeting moments because children have a way of
Hmm.
changing by the minute, by the hour, by the day. But I wonder for you, what were some of the things that just really made you feel secure in being a father, and also
Hmm.
just maybe gave you that father moment pride? I'll start with
Yeah.
you, Christopher, because I feel like I've been starting a lot with Dwayne.
No, it's good, it's good. Oh man. So being a dad, again, there's no manuscript. um I would talk in a way that wasn't necessarily aggressive, but the tone of my voice, right? And more often than not, my daughter will go talk to my mom or my aunt. I'm like, well, why wouldn't she come? Why can't she talk to me? She's 8 now, right? But it's
Mhm.
safe to say that my daughter taught me that I can be um, gentle and assertive at the same time. It's not what I say, it's how I say it. But when my daughter came to me and she just opened up and just talking about everything, that was the moment I knew, okay, I'm doing something right. Finally, she trusts me with her story and her challenges and things. And I granted there's some things that daddy just can't talk about. I can teach you how a king is supposed to treat a queen, but I can't teach you necessarily how to be a queen. But just it's creating that safe place where she can talk to me. That was my aha moment. Like, yes, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do.
And it's great you have a village to help out.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, how about for you, Dwayne?
Well, it's Julian. It sounds trite and almost overused, but he has really transformed my world. My
Mm,
worldview of everything is so different because I'm the father of Julian,
Mm,
and because it forced me out of, again, what I thought was a true hard path with guardrails and boundaries. This is the way it's going to be, my life and my children's lives. And so for me, it's just been, every day I'm going to talk about a Disney animated movie every day.
yeah.
Every day
Yeah.
we're going to have discussions, and yesterday we were together, we were walking on the trail. There's a nature trail that we walk on near our house. And we were walking on the trail, and I get, Dad, what's your favorite mystical sidekick from a Disney movie? So
uh-huh.
if
Oh
you
wow.
if you break that question down, he's going
Yeah.
deep. so, so we have
Like,
conversations like that all the time, and he's waiting for your answer because he has the answer actually. So,
right.
but
And why?
it's just it's engaging with him and seeing the world through his eyes too. And I know this is something Christopher probably can relate to. You know, as your child grows and develops, you kind of see the world through their eyes, and you realize that there's no one way to live. And so I enjoy. It's just the moments because you got to understand something, Camille and Christopher, that you know a vast majority of people with autism on the spectrum, they're nonverbal. And one of the issues with Julian when he was very young was he was minimal when it comes to being verbal, but a lot of that was what they call echolalia, where he would just simply parrot back something you said. So we didn't know if we would ever actually have conversations with Julian, and he really didn't. Like a lot of people with autism, he wasn't crazy about being touched. He wouldn't look at you, and when you held him, he wanted to be turned away from your body. So with that as our basis in the beginning, and now he wants to run up and hug me. He wants to laugh and talk to me, and he wants kisses from his mom and his dad. And for us to be able to have conversations, it's like that is pure gold.
Yeah.
Because I know I've talked to people across the country who said they would love to be able to have a conversation with their child. And it's just hard because a lot of them, as I said, are nonverbal. So being able to do that, the recognition that we're very fortunate with all the issues we have, and there are myriad challenges we have with Julian. He's also one of the, I know one of the focuses of the conference coming up is on mental health. You know, Julian was diagnosed on top of his autism is having schizophrenia. So he's on a daily battery. His cocktail of medicine is, you know, it's just very disciplined. We have to adhere to it because he once had a breakdown. He was hospitalized, and he can just lose it. So knowing all this, we just so value engaging with our child. And I enjoy watching the engagement between he and his brother, which is different, but they still connect in a way.
You know, you bring up a great point with mental health and your son having schizophrenia as well. I'm curious because ever since 2020, there's been like this awakening with how the police treat Black people, especially Black men.
Right.
And I know there's been a few incidences where someone was having a mental break or something and called the police for help, and the opposite happened. So I know that probably hit on some fears for you, having two Black sons in that sense, and being Black male yourself in that sense as well. But what have been some things that because I remember we had a family member that was possibly coming to live with us who had some mental health issues, and they made a point of saying you should go to the police, introduce them to the person, and let them know that these are some of the side effects of that, so they get to know them, so they're not scared of them or assuming they're trying to do some harm. And I was just like, that seems like that would draw more attention that we don't need. And I was scared of it and so on. So I'm curious for you, what have been some guidelines or some things that you've had, like perimeters or boundaries you had to set to try to, I guess, prevent from happening, or understanding the importance of maybe them deferring money to mental health professionals or social services, them be the ones that get brought in when it's something of that nature too.
Sure. Well, I said I know that I have a neurotypical son, Jared, and so with Jared, it was more the traditional talk. You know, as a young Black man, this is what you understand, and I always raised because of my public engagement and profile. We know a lot of people, and I've always taught my sons, Jared in particular, I'm speaking of right now, that be aware of the real world realities of engaging with law enforcement. But I never raised them to think in an adversarial way towards police officers because, as I said, my brother is an administrator with the police department, a lifelong administrator, and I have another brother who was a military policeman for a long time. So there's great respect and understanding for the difficult tasks they have. So with Jared, it was typical, son, you're a Black man, you have to understand that. And these are the ways you engage yourself, and he's good. Now with Julian, see, if there is that thing that wakes me up at 3 a.m. and sends shivers and horrors through my world, through my life, is the idea that Julian would somehow be caught in a situation with engaging with a police officer, and Julian doesn't react the way you think he should react, and the police officer's following a book, a protocol,
Yeah.
That's what scared that is the thing that frightens me. And there was a young man in Florida who police detained. There was video of it. It went viral. And he had autism. I knew he did. When I was watching the video, I knew he had autism when they were engaged.
Yeah.
When I saw the camera on. And they held him down on the ground for a long time. And he was crying and screaming. And to them, that's not comporting with their instructions. But what you've got to understand is someone with autism, like Julian, when Julian is really pressed, he might erupt. He doesn't, that's just him. So for me, the thing is, we have done everything we can. Now, Julian's never really in situations like that because, again, I'm his legal guardian. He's under our care. So it's like having a small child. So he's never alone by himself out anywhere anyway. But he's so going back to his personality. We're out somewhere. You'll see a police officer. Hello, hi, officer. How are you doing today? And they just melt away. They just start talking to him, and so they try to answer his Disney questions. And so that's the thing that's the hardest is to imagine that happening with Julian because it would be. Yeah. I know it could go so wrong. I completely could see it going wrong. So that's the thing that scares me probably more than anything else is the idea that they would see a young black man and they wouldn't really look. Yeah. Look, they have eye contact and they go into protocol mode. And I shudder to think about that.
No, I mean, with your brothers being in the military, well, one being a military policeman, one being in the local police department, I guess. Did they give you any insight or any, like just for other fathers that may have that same 3 a.m. worry, was there anything that they gave you or gave you some resonance of hope or maybe these fears are unwarranted, not necessarily unwarranted because they're not, but just.
Yeah. I do know, Camille, there have been grassroots efforts in different parts of the country, and we've done it here too. We've had programs where we engage with the police departments and to talk about dealing with persons with autism, to try to get them to understand us really, dig a little deeper when you're assessing your situation, because you're dealing with someone with autism, it would be very rare if they would have a weapon with them. They might be upset and not listening to your instructions, not adhering to what they're supposed to do when you tell them to do something. But try to know the signs, the general signs of someone who has a developmental disability, and really recognize and think about what you're dealing with here, And so we've tried. I know we've tried to educate local forces, and I know there's some programs, I think in Colorado and Minnesota, some other places where they're actively engaged with them. So most places now have some sort of program, curriculum that deals with that, because that's frankly the only way you can address it is for the force out there, the police forces out there to be educated enough to go, this is not a typical situation I'm dealing with right now. Right. So I've got to figure out, how do I communicate with this person and try and bring them down and settle the situation down? Yeah,
definitely diffusing and not making it worse. Yeah. So for you, Christopher, I'm wondering, even for you, because it's, granted, with a daughter, sometimes you don't feel as scared, but there's other fears out there with raising a daughter. Being a male, I don't have to explain that to you. But I wonder for you, when you heard of all these different stories, even with Trayvon Martin being young and so on, how did you, or do you have those kinds of conversations with your daughter? How do you address that with her?
Oh my goodness! That is a great question. Being in this space now, I'm very real with my daughter. Of course, I talk to her according to her age. I think for me, it's creating, again, that safe place. So with that, I'm the director for the Department of Juvenile Justice Teen After School Center. So my daughter is around that all the time. And just yesterday, the kids and my daughter got an opportunity to develop a skit around, mental health and parental development and issues that they see in the community that affect them. So it's their perspective, right? And get where I'm going with it, where the community got an opportunity to come in with the police actually being there, right? So it was the police and community together. It's called PACT. they're acting this out. So being in that space, they actually got an opportunity to see real life scenes from the kids' viewpoint, their perspective, while
Mm.
simultaneously allowing the community to say, "Hey, let's pause. This is how I would handle that situation," right? And then the police would actually, give their perspective. So what that allows me to do is create a somewhat like Dwayne is saying, talking about Disney and talking about those characters. I create spaces that um, allow her to see how it could potentially be so she can develop her own thinking, right? I don't tell her what to think or what to do. I ask her thought-provoking questions to arouse her interest so that she can learn how to think for herself, right? So that's how I approach those scenarios. I allow her to see, to create that thought, and then I'm going to create something creative around it, around an artistic expression, right? And allowing her to be herself and exemplify that through her creative process so that she can interpret it. That makes sense, what I'm
Yeah,
saying, and
no, definitely does.
having these conversations, but not only with my daughter, she gets to see it with kids who are actually in those circumstances and situations. So she's in it and sees it. So they're helping each other so that it's kind of like one foot in, one foot out. And I don't like to say at risk. I feel like we're all at risk at some point, but economically challenged youth who are more often than not in those situations. Like, what are we doing to create a safe place to have that conversations, to give them real solutions based off of who they are? Identifying their gifts, identifying their talents, and identifying their callings, and allowing them to be the voice because it's about them, right? And then on the other side of that, it's influence and legislation. So now they are empowered. They understand the obstacles, the structural impediments. They understand how law affects us every day. They understand who to go to. They understand who to talk to. But most importantly, they know how to communicate, and they have relationships in their communities. So how are we building relationships in our communities to help prevent some of these circumstances? Granted that we won't always be able to change everything, right? But it's
Mm.
about creating a solution and focusing on those solutions with the expressions of our kids. So that's how I handle those circumstances with my daughter.
Man, I just want to say the fathers next week are in for a treat. You guys are going to be sharing so much knowledge with them, giving them
Yeah.
the backbone and the courage and the resources to really shine as fathers on not only Father's Day, but also Juneteenth. So next weekend, there's so many different, or actually week, because there's some events that even start
Yeah.
next Thursday. But
Absolutely.
I've lost time because I had I had it out of my visual, so I realized I'm going way over. But I just want to make sure everyone knows how they can keep up with you, how they can support you. So if there's any information you want to share, please do so now. I'll start with you, Dwayne.
If they'd like to get involved with your local autism society, support it, outreach. My book is Journey with Julian. It's on Amazon from Simon and Schuster. You can find it under my name. And just uh, when you look, make sure you see.
Mm, so
Mm.
simple, right? That means a lot. Okay, Christopher, how about for you?
Yeah, man, I got to give a shout out to Tony Craddock and Derek Bird for just making these connections. And thank you, Camille. Thank you, Dwayne. You can visit our website at skieslimitfoundation.org. And you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Mr. Father Registry. And always know the things that stand in the way become the way. Obstacles are the way. That's it. That's all that simple.
Yeah, there's no short route, right? You got to just go through
Hmm.
it. All right.
That's
Well,
it.
again, thank you so much. And happy Father's Day to both of you as well. And to all the fathers out there watching, thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure you follow me also on my website, CamilleCower.com, and all of my social media handles are there as well. So thanks again for tuning in to the E Spot with Camille. I'm your host, Camille Cower. Have a great weekend.